Welcome, everyone, as you all shuffle on in. Welcome to the Kudomusicology Ludomusicology Literature Review stream. I'm your host, Musicologess, for this not a podcast. And with us today is the illustrious William Gibbons. I feel like this is a really big get for the channel.
Oh, no, my pleasure. My pleasure.
It is so good to have you. So the fun thing is you had a lot to choose from. You publish a lot, turns out. A few books that you're involved with here, including your monograph, which we will get to eventually. But we wanted to start with one of your articles or chapters, so I actually let Will choose this one. So this one we picked because it is in a book that I think a lot of you might not own necessarily because it's not devoted to Ludo. And this is Recomposing the Past Representations of Early Music on Stage and Screen, edited by James Cook, Alexander Kolassa, and Adam Whittaker. So this one was one that we thought could have been missed just based on where it was. It's also kind of expensive, I think, right?
It sure is, yeah.
Any academic books tend to be, but sometimes when I see the recommended price and it's like $180 for a paperback, you're like, what? I don't think that was this one though. This one was not that bad, or I wouldn't have a copy. I think it was 50 something when I got it. So we picked this one. Yes, it's exciting. Hi, Karen. Hello, friends.
Hi, everybody.
So we're very excited to have you because you have famously never streamed with us on Twitch, and so you have a bit of an aura about you that you're, I don't know, too good for Twitch, maybe.
Oh no, I don't think Twitch is too good for me, if anything.
So you're scared of Twitch, is what you're saying?
No, I sort of avoided it for so long that now it just sort of became like an article of faith for me, and then this is, so you should feel good that I'm like, breaking my Twitch fast to join you.
I know. I'm so excited at the people that maybe normally wouldn't do Twitch but are saying yes to this specific stream. So we're quite happy about that. So let's see. I met you at NACFGM 1 in Youngstown.
The original.
Yeah. And we're lucky that you still talk to me because at that NACFGM I was giving a paper in which I basically said your footnote was wrong in Blip Bloop Bach. That's not really what I did, but you had a footnote about Captain Comic and the use of Bach in the level and the sound being kind of screwed up and not matching the score. And it had nothing to do with what you were talking about in the article, so the footnote just kind of speculates on it, that the level takes place in a computer and just wondering if it was kind of like meta commentary about the limitations of the console or something. Very quickly moved on from, but I went in and I did a transcription and I figured out sort of what was going on. And that became my eventual Bach publication that came out last year. So I was nervous though, because I was a grad student. I was like, I don't want this person that I have read and really enjoyed all of his work to not like me.
Oh no, yeah, I actually hate you. Actually, I'm playing a really long game.
You have been playing a really long game.
I'm just gonna wait until I have the right moment to crush you.
Darn it.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, I like being called out when it means somebody read the thing that you wrote and is engaging with it in some way. So I would much rather someone like call me out than just send something out into the world that no one reads. So I
took the footnotes, man. Who reads those?
Yeah, that's why I like endnotes, because nobody reads them. So
you can hide
like
whatever
Easter
you want
eggs. Back there.
Didn't my Bach article come out last? It came out a lot. Was it 2 years ago? Am I just losing sense of time because of the pandemic? It might have been 2020. It's later than we would think. Because I gave it again at a second conference, and then they published it. 3 8-bit translations of the Toccata. See, now I have to look it up because I don't remember.
Okay, Karen says 2019.
2019. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wow. What is time? What does time mean? Okay, so it's getting old now. Either way, yeah, it just feels like it just came out. Anyone else feel like 2019 was yesterday? I do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I was shocked that this article came out, 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So we met at NACFGM and then just kept seeing each other at conferences. And I don't know, you're my bud. I think we're friends in IRL. Um, we we hang
Yes,
out
absolutely.
at
Yeah.
conferences, etc. So it's really neat because you were somebody that I still look up to and sort of wish that I could be as productive as, and I aim to have my work have as much resonance. And it's neat to also be your friend.
Oh, no, I think that's what's so great about, the field as a whole, but also especially this Ludo group is all about people interacting both as human beings and as scholars, which is really nice.
Yeah, hearts, heart eyes emoji. It's pretty exciting, and I think that that's another thing to sort of get out there to the stream. Although it is a lot of friends out there, but in case we have folks that aren't as in the field, to just recognize that some real genuine friendships are made out of the field, and that it's so much more rewarding to do things that way instead of being like the lone wolf, like let me go publish and not talk to any of you. Like,
Yeah.
how boring would that be? So
No, it's terrible. And I remember I started off as a piano major, and I really enjoyed that. I love that. But wow, that can be really like alienating because you just
it's
you're
you
in
in a
the
practice
room
room.
just practicing. Yeah. And so that's my favorite thing about scholarship is engaging. I don't understand the idea of like I'm just going to wall myself off and like never engage with other people. And yeah. Anyway, no, everyone's awesome. You're all awesome.
Get inside the labyrinth and never come out. Speaking of which, let's move on with this. So here is the full citation for today.
Wow.
So instead of the usual front page, I decided at the last minute yesterday. I was like, oh, I know an image that needs to get dug up out of the archive here. So
I just want to say that was like a decade ago, that photo. If we want to now talk about like feeling old. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. You're very kind.
This came from Sarah PC, was working on Assassin's Creed and some various things, and had an anxious Twitter post about wanting to propose something to NACFGM, but being worried because she knew that you were working on like reuse of classical music in games. And she was like, I'm really worried I'm going to get Gibbons, like he's going to propose it, but it's also going to be better than mine,
Oof.
So like there would be no chance that I would get in. So we talked about getting Gibbons, and then I posted this.
Thanks. Very, very good. Yeah,
you're pretty outstanding in your field.
Yeah, you're very generous. You're very generous.
And now no glasses, so the image is definitely out of date.
I know. I don't think I have any of those clothes anymore. It's a whole new me has been constructed in the length of time since then. So I'll get you an updated shot.
Oh, good. So,
yeah.
Go find a field.
Yeah, we've got a lot of them, turns out, in way upstate New York. There's no shortage of fields in which to choose. Yeah.
So we'll update this for the modern era.
Yeah, that was a Texas field, to be clear. So I need a New York field.
Yeah, you need a New York field. That makes sense.
Yeah,
you're up in my neck of the woods now. You're gonna have seasons. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Wear your sweaters. Autumn's gonna be amazing. I'm just gonna hear so much about like autumn walks and scarves and
cowl neck sweaters, coffees. Yeah.
Be like out there apple picking. I don't know.
There's like 50 orchards like anywhere near here. Yeah. I'll be out like taking a day to churn apple butter or something. I don't know. Yeah.
I've made apple butter. It's wonderful. You can just throw it in the slow cooker for like 8 hours, and then it just really it's like applesauce, and then you just immersion blend it and add a few more things.
I'm absolutely 0% surprised that you have a solid apple butter technique.
It's good stuff. Yeah, I usually go apple picking for my birthday every year because I share a birthday with Bob Ross, October 29th. So it's like peak apple season in October. So especially toward the end of the season, the Granny Smith apples come in, and I love those. So very good time. Anyway, to move from apples to dragons. Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest, 1986, depending on where you are, came out the same year I did. Music by Koichi Sugiyama. And the opening throne room track draws heavily on a Baroque style. Why did you go with Dragon Warrior in this article?
So I think, probably like a lot of people in the field, not the literal field, the musicology field, I started off with Dragon Warrior is one of the earliest games that I really remember playing and spending time with. And so it's one that just like sprung to mind immediately. And, I've told similar stories, I think, in some of my other more confessional writings, but I really, I was a kid and I was taking piano lessons and I was doing all this. And I really loved when the music that I was, experiencing in the game would somehow overlap with what I was doing. So I think as a kid, I recognized that there was something really like classical, giant scare quotes around that as a musical style. And so when I got approached about this project, I jumped right to this example. This is sort of where I started from. And so built the whole rest of the project kind of coalesced around this initial example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we just saw Elizabeth Medina Gray last week, who goes for Dragon Quest. So, as opposed to Dragon Warrior. So that's the US-Japan distinction. Musically, is there a difference? I don't remember.
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think this was one that this is pretty early, so I don't think this had quite the stratification that we saw in some of the other games. But yeah, the other interesting thing, and we're going to grill you right off the bat, these are all Will's transcriptions. I just retranscribed them so that I wouldn't have to scan them out of the book. But they are all Will's original transcriptions, so I thought we could take a listen and a look, because there is just something so neat about having it on a piano that really highlights this example. Let's listen to it first, and then I'll ask my question. It'll be a repeat, because we're a good little binary form, right?
Love it.
We don't have the second repeat. It just goes back, right? That's where the loop point is.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So interestingly, just a couple notes about, it does sound weird when you're so used to it in the game. And yet it would work well on a harpsichord, but it just sounds like one of Bach's keyboard works. So our question, this came up last week. So in Elizabeth's article, she actually quantifies the notes differently.
Mm-hmm.
She did eighth notes where you have 16th notes. So instead of having a 4-bar phrase, she has an 8-bar phrase. And so our question to you basically becomes, was there a particular reason that you chose to do it this way? Was there something about the 4-bar phrase kind of fitting the Baroque keyboard idiom better? Did it just look better on the page, look more like piano music this way? Was there any particular reason you quantized it the way you did?
Right. No, I would say the overwhelming thing is, again, my experience is coming at a lot of this keyboard music as a, performer. And so to me, like, this is what it would look like if I opened up a, Bach invention or whatever the similar piece might be and saw this, that I would expect this sort of framework. Now, I also absolutely understand. I'm not suggesting that this is right or wrong. And we can get into this if you want later in the talk, but I actually am usually, as you know, Dana, extremely resistant to transcription as a whole. It just seemed for this particular project, I couldn't really get around it. And because I was just talking about things that were sort of in there. But I think there is a utility to either way. My original thought actually in the article was that I would pair up the examples with a similar sort of Baroque example, so I could sort of point to this is this and this is this, and that I think came out of that originally. I ended up not doing that for space, but And it sort of derailed the argument a little bit. But I think that's what you're seeing is the vestige of
Yeah.
that.
And
Yeah.
so then also Elizabeth was going channel by channel. So like this
Oh, yeah.
A isn't an like you say, as a performer you would just do that as an octave in the left hand.
Yep.
It's actually in pulse 1, or I guess pulse 2 was the melody line here. And so it was up here in hers, versus
Oh, yeah.
just having the lower note, because we couldn't have simultaneous sounding. But that's already solved by saying that you're treating this as a keyboard work. So
Yeah, exactly. I gave absolutely zero thought to the actual implementation, the technological implementation of it, beyond just thinking of it in terms of, well, they had this many number of channels to work with. I wasn't thinking this is on this, channel, this is on this channel. So yeah, no, that's really interesting.
yeah, we were interested and then excited that we had that like immediate connection as we were doing that one the week before. And that one, of course, is talking about how the beep speech agrees with this track. It was like 80% of the time, or whatever the percentage was, because it's an A5, and so just with the harmony, it's either duplicating something that where we have an A lower in the texture, or it agrees with it as a consonance. So, and even when it didn't, it kind of agreed with the whole thing. So it might be like a passing tone dissonance, but it resolves sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say you get a lot of leeway, I think, with this kind of texture, because it's either, it's a pedal tone, or it's a suspension, or it's something, right? There's ways to incorporate that dissonance in ways that are sort of analyzable or rationalizable, if that makes sense. So yeah, no, I would totally see that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody will disagree with the idea that this has a binary form. Yes, the second half doesn't repeat. I mean, it repeats in that it loops back to the beginning. It doesn't have an internal repeat, so it's not like AABB, but it is. We see that, though. We see kind of rounded binary and things like that, where maybe the second half doesn't repeat. So use of sequences, melodic gestures. This really on the page, it looks like a keyboard work. Have you played it like for yourself for fun?
Oh yeah, I mean that's how I did all these transcriptions, right? I did them at the keyboard, and so yeah, no, I did, and I kept thinking, I wonder if you could sneak this into like a music theory textbook, just like slide it in there and see if anybody noticed, I think you could. I really think you could easily demonstrate any number of theoretical concepts related to 18th century counterpoint or whatever you want to talk about with this. Yeah, absolutely.
We're gonna stage a coup, looks like, in the chat. Everyone's gonna help. We like this idea.
Absolutely.
So through this historical illusion, I'm quoting you here, Sugiyama's short work exudes refinement and elegance, simultaneously depicting the grandeur of Loric's richly appointed throne room and imbuing the scene with a pomp and circumstance befitting the dragon-slaying quest the player is undertaking. So we also know that Sugiyama had classical training at a time when a lot of game composers did not. Formal training. What was his background? Was he conservatory musician, pianist?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
I think
he's a conservatory musician, and then he'd been working in I feel like anime scores for quite a while before he moved to games, is my recollection. And of course, he's kind of a problematic figure. So I've resisted delving too deeply into biographical anything here, although we can certainly talk about that. But yeah, I think there is that element of, I think this particular piece, this particular score really wears its like historical or like compositional chops on its sleeve in a way that a lot of NES scores maybe don't. They're more experimental, or they're going for just a different thing. And no, I feel like this is, I can imagine if I were a composer in '86 and this came out, you just like roll your eyes and you're like, oh, Sugiyama is doing that thing again where he's like writing fugues or whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, I wonder about that. It seems very, very fundamentally different in some ways than a lot of what was going on on the NES. And of course, I think one could talk about the sort of irony of this entirely new medium with all these new possibilities and everything that goes into that, and then just doing our best to replicate the same old thing that we always do on this new medium. So there is something,
instead of doing like really out there, like aleatoric,
Yeah, like, Hip Tanaka's doing it exactly the same time or whatever, right? With Metroid or if you there's this similar date on that, right? You know, and you're thinking about these two radically different things that are happening with the same hardware. It's kind of interesting.
So that's a question that you get into here, because this isn't, Sugiyama being held up to the light as a weird case study. It's that this influence pops up pretty frequently and in connection to certain specific contexts. And so the game genre, like the fantasy setting that are so many RPGs and like action adventure games are set in, are all drawing out of this zeitgeist that was happening in the particularly 70s and 80s. And this, you get into this later, but there's good reason that folks are kind of coming back to these things, but it's also just one set of games within the genre. That we certainly wouldn't say that Mario is doing this, or again, Metroid, like you just said. So there are games doing other things too.
Oh, absolutely.
In the NES, but like it's prominent enough to make us go, huh, what's going on here? Why is everybody getting into this? So this is what I called your thesis and your walkthrough, because you say this chapter. That's always a good clue. Always a good clue that it's going to walk us through. This chapter, while by no means exhaustive, is an attempt to begin teasing out both practical and aesthetic motivations for composers to employ Baroque musical styles in video games during the late 1980s and early 1990s. I am particularly interested here in two aspects of how these late Baroque musical styles aided early game designers to transcend the limitations of their medium. One, how these musical styles come to signify directly a sense of place by creating a sonic metaphor for complex architecture, and more generally, two, how the appropriation of Baroque idioms may have helped situate fantasy video games within a transmedia cultural context that includes popular music, cinema, and literature. So the idea that fantasy was kind of in the water in this era.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that. I should tell your group here that this is 5 years old, right? And so I had this moment, Dana and I were talking earlier this week, where I was like, do I really remember what I said 5 years ago? And I'll tell an anecdote in this, so it's a slightly sad anecdote. But yeah, so I decided not to reread the chapter to see if I still, in fact, as this conversation unfolds, to see if I still agree with the things that I said and if I would in any way nuance them now. So this is a thought experiment for me as well, going in semi-cold into this conversation. Yeah, but given the news, the sad news of Richard Taruskin today, I would share one of my favorite things I ever heard him say was someone asked him a question at a Q&A session and said, you just said the exact opposite of this thing that you wrote 10 years ago in this book, right? Here's the part where you just said the exact opposite of the thing that you just said. And he just like stopped for a second and he came back and said, I just read that the human body totally replaces itself every 7 years. Every cell is different 7 years later from the ones that started. And he said, I cannot possibly be held accountable for something I said 2 Taruskins ago. And so that has really stuck with me for ages. And I just thought, so this is like 5/7 of a different Will Gibbons. So I'm curious to see where it goes. Yeah.
I love that. That's such a great story. Yeah, so maybe we still agree.
We lose our chat here, by the way. I'm not.
The apostrophes are getting messed up on
the apostrophe catastrophe
specifically. And that's something I'm going to have to go in and play with settings, but I'm not going to mess with for right now.
Good point.
Because, we'll deal. Maybe just don't use apostrophes, everyone.
Yeah, we're not allowed. Yeah, no contractions.
No contractions. Write out all your words like an academic.
Yeah.
So then we get into the question of, well, is this just neo-Baroque? Mm-hmm. And you sort of say, no, it isn't. Partially because when we apply these terms to people, we are referring to a huge range of music. Debussy to Price to Parrot, often merging styles with modern techniques. or about adapting pre-existing music. So Stravinsky's Pulcinella, Respighi's Ancient Airs and Dances. So here though, in the video games, composers were creating original works in Baroque forms and styles. I guess if there's something to be said, that you could argue that they're merging the Baroque forms and styles with the timbre and sort of the technical pieces of the technology of a modern century. But your point here is, you're like, I'm just going to say Baroque.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would stand
Like,
by
why
that
do we
point
need the
that,
neo?
yeah, to me, yeah, we don't even need the neo. There's nothing neo about this except the timbre. And, as I make the case in the article at another point, as I recall, like, that's one thing that is so appealing about Baroque music, is who cares about the timbre? Like 90% of the time, the timbre was irrelevant to the composer or the performer or whatever. You just play it on whatever's handy, and if that's
trio sonata with kind of flexible instrumentation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you got two flutes, do it with two flutes. You got two violins, do it with two violins. You got one of each, do it, whatever. And so same thing here, right? It's like, does it really matter conceptually if it's a chip playing it or if it's a harpsichord playing it, or whatever the case may be. So
fair.
I don't know. Maybe this is not like sort of a mainstream understanding of neo-Baroque, but I would have to say, or neoclassical, that it has to have some element that is not just a like sort of sonic pastiche to be the neo part. The neo part is like, I'm going to take this old thing and do something new with it, not I'm just going to take this old thing and do exactly the same thing with it, but for a different instrument. So
yeah, it kind of reminds me of John and Robert Matz's Ambition, A Minuet in Power, where he was tasked to write 18th century music, just straight up. And that's what it is. The whole game is that. We had him on with us to stream it at one point. And yeah, it was pretty much like adhering to the harmonic forms and all of the things. Here we get a totally modern game that's doing the exact same thing. So yeah, creating original works in that style.
Right.
Because that game is a little bit before the French Revolution is where that's set. So the music is very appropriate to that specific environment. So here, we're kind of drawing on it in a little bit more general of a form, because these things aren't necessarily set in our world in a particular time. So we're using it in a more generic way, as you say. If it ain't Baroque, why fix it? Ha, ha, ha.
Knew it was happening. Knew it was coming.
You knew it was coming. Anything mentioning the Baroque, we don't get to talk about it too much in games, too, because it's further back from us. So it's had to fit the pun in there somewhere. So, of course, there are practical reasons why Baroque textures might work well on an NES. So, for those that don't know how a Nintendo Entertainment System worked, briefly, there were programmable sound generator channels, and there were 5 of them. But functionally, we had a texture of melody, harmony, bass, and then percussion in the noise channel, and then the 5th channel was the sampler channel. That doesn't get used as much. So, most of the time, you have this sort of 3-voice texture of melody, harmony, and bass, which is going to be well suited to contrapuntal texture of like a keyboard. What did you say? A Bach invention, like a 2-part invention. It's going to fit that really well, but extended jazz chords, well, which notes of the 5-note chord am I going to leave out? Right? Because I can't sound them both at once. I can arpeggiate the jazz chord and do that kind of rapid arpeggiation that we associate with the early chiptune music. But in general, jazz chords are a little harder to convey as single units. And then you mentioned, this is where you come back to the timbre, that there's already a flexibility of instrumentation. And then also, we had this precedent with Switched on Bach and other Wendy Carlos experiments. So we've already been hearing Bach for a few years now on synth, right?
Yeah, so I think there is this sort of familiarity to the idea, and I think people at this time already sort of had, people who grew up with that were then the people who were writing a lot of this music, and so I think they were probably really familiar with that idea, and we'd also had things like A Clockwork Orange, and the sort of Purcell synth thing that happened at the beginning there, and the adaptation. So I think people were used to the idea of Baroque music sort of being mashed up in interesting ways with electronic sounds. So it sort of made sense. Yeah, and there's definitely ways to do jazz chords on the NES, as we've heard. There's plenty of games that do that, but I definitely think it is trickier, and especially when you add in, as we were talking about, Dana, the complexity of when you have to start dropping things out for the sound effects, right? And then the more sound effects are going on, the more things you have to drop out, and so then it becomes a really complicated mess of, if you start leaving too many notes out of jazz, then it stops making like any sense. And this is, I think, for the most part, that you only have 2, maybe 3 voices happening simultaneously, and it really gives you the freedom to have those effects without necessarily having a massive effect on what's happening. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. I can absolutely understand why you would want to do that.
Yeah. And plus, I think there's something to be said for, it's not like you couldn't sustain a note on the NES, but given that you don't have a ton of channels, there is a tendency towards sort of like density of rhythm. And so counterpoint, stuff is moving everywhere. And so it sort of makes the texture seem bigger than it is because there's just so much happening. Instead of having, these long swell chords that we might get in later games where we have a few extra channels, we can have the strings like sitting on a held chord. Here we want to just have that movement and activity, and it adds excitement. It can, affect how the player is playing and have all of these effects.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with that. Totally.
So there's kind of an architectural resonance here that this is my favorite part of this, because like up to now you're following along, everyone's like, oh yeah, cool, like like I agree, that's good. This is where we start getting the so what of it, right? That specifically you're making a connection between medieval castles and labyrinths and this type of music. This is where this is showing up. Even in games that don't have like an overall Baroque score, if they have a moment of the Baroque, it's gonna be in a castle generally.
Or a cathedral sometimes.
Or a cathedral or a labyrinth, some kind of like important place.
Right. And something where we might think of it as being an architecturally complicated space. And here, I mean, something that I think about a lot with early music or early game music, and you've heard me talk about this, I think, a few other places, Dana, is I think so often the music becomes a stand-in for what's missing visually from the image. And so the music itself takes on this role of trying to fill out this picture of the elements that we're missing, right? So, if we're talking about games based on cartoons, very often you have music from the cartoon to sort of like try to remind you of like, oh, this is what this was. I remember now what this looked like when it was on the screen or something like that.
You've talked about that with Fantasia, right? That like,
yes, exactly.
Just the hint of the Sorcerer's Apprentice in a single channel makes you remember the full orchestrated version that you heard when you saw the film.
Right. And so it becomes, to harken back to Elizabeth, it becomes this sort of like ear con almost for what you've already seen. And here, I think same kind of thing, except it's more, I think in a certain way, it's more sophisticated because you're evoking the sort of complexity of textures and also the way it, appears in other media, Baroque music. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you've said this elsewhere. You say this in Blip Bloop Bach, where you mentioned both these examples, I think.
I won't shut up about this.
NES Pirates, both actually using Bach and not just Bach-like. You also mentioned this in Unlimited Replays as well.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think, notable that in Battle of Olympus, it's the temple to the gods where the music happens, and then you got the governor's mansion. So in both cases, you have it sort of associated with power, right? And so I think that's also. I think we could make a case about Baroque era being the sort of era of monolithic power structures. So it's either the church as this all-powerful organization, or it's the nobility as this sort of all-powerful ruling organization. And Baroque music sort of, or these musical styles sort of associated with both of those places. So I think we tend to have it in places where there's sort of this lavish display of power going on, whether that's a cathedral sculpture or a cathedral space, or whether it's a castle or palace or something like that. So yeah. Or labyrinth in the case, usually that's connected somehow to one of these. It's always like, the Dark Lord's labyrinth, right?
Unless you score it with David Bowie, but that's in film.
Yes, exactly, right.
That's in film.
I'm gonna make a
lot of synth in there too, actually.
I was gonna say, yeah.
It's all connected.
Yeah, reminds you of the Babe.
The Babe with the Power?
Yeah. Not gonna
It's
not
like you
gonna
were
go down.
just saying, all these
Yeah.
spaces of power.
Yep.
So medieval castles, labyrinths are common in the game design, especially in RPGs and fantasy adventure. Yeah, I copied that over. Yeah, it's the same. Oh, it's a title thing. I wonder what I was gonna put there. I often, when I'm making these, and you'll catch me do this, I just, so that I don't have to reapply all of the font stuff that I've done, I just like duplicate slides. So that happens. Yeah. You've argued elsewhere that even when it's anachronistic, like the game is set nowhere near the Baroque era at all, it is conveying the seriousness and the grandeur. And then, as you point out, it's often reserved for castles. And your Dragon Warrior 3 example has a shockingly chromatic fugato section, sort of where we might expect it to have looped. It instead kind of goes off into its own thing with a lengthy pedal point in the triangle channel. So let's hear that, shall we?
Yeah, I think that one is a very solid example of Sugiyama being like, I've got this now. Like, I figured out how this NES thing works.
Make that centered so it's nice. So here we have pulses 1 and 2 being spread out again pianistically in the treble voice here. So, and then triangle channel is our left hand if we were playing it on piano. So this is actually one of my favorite tracks. So Dragon Warrior 3 was my first Dragon Warrior. I went back and played the original ones, but my brother brought home the NES in, I think it was 91 or 92. Wow. 91, because I think I was 5. He was 10. He got it for his 10th birthday. And so this was one of, we kind of had to go back through the library a little bit because I was late in their development. So we kind of went back and figured out like what the good games were. So the first 2 I played, of course, were original Zelda. And then we had the triple cartridge that had Track Meet, Mario, and Duck Hunt. So
nice.
My first 4 games were spread amongst 2 cartridges. And then we were really into platformers. So we did Mega Man's. We started with 3 as well in that.
Yeah.
And then went back and did the other ones. And then Dragon Warrior 3 was always a particular favorite of mine. So I love this track.
It's a good one.
You actually sent me this transcription when you were working on this chapter.
Right.
Because I think you had me read a draft. And then I was like, oh, could I get a draft of this? I turned this into a trio with one of my high school chamber ensembles. They performed this. So speaking of instrumentation being fluid, that was what I used it for.
Nice. Well, I'm glad I could help with that.
It saved me the work of doing it myself. Obviously, I don't. I don't mind doing transcriptions.
For you to do it and save my time.
I really don't mind doing And if any of you ever want, especially of these early games, I love doing transcriptions. Oh man, how much does the Toccata and Fugue to 20th century film? Can that relationship really be understated? Andrew, that Neil Lerner's written on that, Isabella Van Elfren has written on that. Like if you want to get into the film side of Bach and specifically the Toccata and Fugue, or you can go to my article. I talk about it and I cite a lot of those people. That's a good shorthand too.
Yeah,
because I'm basically saying we're doing the same thing in games. Yeah,
I mean, my take would be it's all massively complicated, and I should have given that as sort of a preface to this, where I think one of the challenges of writing an article like this for me is that you're really tempted to sort of draw this clear line, or I am always tempted to draw a clear line between Y and Z, but really there's this very complicated intertextual web of things that's going on. So it's really all of these things always. So anyway, yeah, for me, I think.
Yeah, I figured Andrew had to read all of it, but for the sake of anybody who might be a student or anybody else that hasn't read those things, that's kind of the places to turn to for. There's a lot of like Gothic Bach in particular, of course the D minor might not be by Bach. Well,
yeah,
there's that whole piece of it too, but it's popularly by Bach. We've just decided it's by Bach no matter what.
Yeah.
I don't think it would even necessarily matter to most people. They just know that as the piece that goes in these situations. Like, I wonder how much the average person cares about the idea that it's by Bach.
Or I think they do a lot.
Hey, this is really neat.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot tied up in that, and people just don't really care if what the data says. And it's like it's the minuet, right?
Hmm.
The classic G major, bum, ba-da-da-da-dum, bum, bum,
Yeah.
bum, ba-da-da-dum, right? Which we know for a fact is not by Bach, and yet every children's piano book has it listed as Bach, not Petzold, because you
Because
know
heaven forbid we have a name we don't recognize.
yeah, who cares about that? But kids want to be like, I'm playing Bach. So, right, or
Yeah.
kids, their parents maybe do or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that's 100% in there. And I'll come back, Dana, after we listen to this, to that first point about the anachronism. I'm be curious to see what people have to say about that in chat, but
Yeah.
also a couple thoughts about it.
Let's
Yeah.
listen to this one because I love this one.
Yeah,
And
let's do it.
again,
No,
here it is on piano. Much harder to, if you were going to play this, it would take some fancy finger work, I think.
yeah, I'll come back to that in just a second, too.
Now we get our little fugue, fugato. Love the trill there. And we have our pedal in the triangle. It just hammers on for almost 4 meters. Ugh, it's so good.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
I've always loved that piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have, which I, not that you necessarily have an answer, why is this one held, but this one is eighth notes? Why?
Why is what?
So we have the F sharp here,
Oh,
and it's not 2/8 note. It doesn't track with the, but the
Yep.
second one hammers them on eighth notes. Why?
yeah. No, it is interesting.
That's
And there are
inconsistent.
definitely, yeah. I don't know.
That's
I have no idea.
Weird. The other, where's the other weird moment where I was like, oh, the harmony on that is so funky.
Yeah.
There was like, I think it's earlier.
Yeah, there's a note that I always feel like
it's
should
right
be
here.
raised, and it's not.
Yeah, because like it doesn't work as a sharp either.
Right. Yeah.
Like the bass motion implies that it's an A major chord, right?
Yep.
But then it doesn't work with
Yeah.
it doesn't work with the melody.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like a cascade effect. So this is C natural, which I actually had specifically it's notated specifically.
Yeah, it's really tricky because, either you have the sort of false cross relations there, or you have or you have a dominant 7 with the 7th going up, not down, and then it's just it's just an awkward moment. And I have to imagine Sugiyama was probably like banging his head on a wall about this for a while, and then was like, who in the world is going to care?
Like it goes by quick enough. Who cares?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if I could ask Sugiyama, I would just have these two measures.
Why did you screw this up this way? Yeah, because I think there are ways that could have been ameliorated, I think. But yeah.
Oh, that's a good theory exercise, everybody.
Yeah. Let's do some error
Everybody
detection.
Slightly rewrite this and see how they can get to the same place. Because we are trying to get to D.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, because doing a solid sequence, and then it's just like, nope, here you go. Yeah. And I had a moment.
Yeah, the G natural
goes
goes
I was like, is this a like toccata and fugue Captain Comic moment where he just like missed the accidental and programming it in or whatever?
But it's a cascade because if you raise this,
yep,
should that go down?
Yeah.
Instead of up, but we don't want to double because again, limited. We've got to imply as much harmony as we can. So anyway, that's fun. Yep. What was your question about anachronism? You said you were going to pose something in the chat here.
I mean, I think about this a lot, and the way that Baroque music in particular, or early music, I mean, Karen could certainly comment on this more effectively than I can, but the way that it is just sort of dehistoricized, and I've argued in other places that and about radically different things that we sort of get Walter Benjamin talks about, that certain important moments in history get blasted out of any sort of historical context and just become part of the yet site, right? The now time, that it's always just eternal and present. And I sort of think there's something that happens that way with this high Baroque music, where it's used in so many different settings that like nobody really knows when this was happening, or what was, not nobody, but like the general, I would say, listening population doesn't have this sort of chronological association with Baroque music that they have maybe with different other musical styles. And so Baroque music is just like, when did this even happen, right? It's just this thing that's always eternal, and it's never, it's never changing, and it's, yeah. So I don't know. I think that happens for lots of reasons, but I think that also enables the uses that we have here, where it'd be very strange for them, I think, to have, very overtly 19th century musical styles, maybe. It's, the overtly late Baroque styles just sort of get put in wherever, and it's okay.
Yeah, you mentioned period film at one point, like period pieces that are also kind of like using this music, whether or not it's correct to the era.
Yeah,
at least that's one source of where people have heard it and have this connection of like rich people, powdered wigs, like they're sitting at a fancy banquet in a fancy hall, and this type of music sounds right for that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, yeah. Like Pirates is a classic example, right? You start the game in 1520, you get Bach. You start the game in 1720, you get Bach, right? It's as if, music history doesn't change. There's just things that happened a long time ago, and they're all happening at the same time.
Yeah, for real. Where is Ashley? Ashley's the only one of the only people that came to my office hour streams, and it like she's not a student in my class. She was just like, I saw you were streaming. What's up? And we started talking about harp.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So Ashley was famously on the stream we did with John Robert Matz, where we looked at ambition, and she and I had powdered wigs for the stream.
Nice.
That's
nice.
That's a good VOD to go back to, because I mean, A, we had the composer on with us, and B, the wigs were really excellent. So perfect. I was really really excited. I found it on like Amazon, but it was actually a pretty good looking wig. I still have it. It's right over there.
Yeah, why would you not?
Yeah, why? Well, yeah, you got to hold on to these things. You never know when you're gonna need a wig. Like a good powdered wig for something, for a bit, or for a costume.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. I've always been up for a theme party ever since I was little. So.
And 18th century powdered wig seems like the right moment. Okay. I like it.
So we got a lot of Baroque castles.
Ah.
Other games that invoke the Baroque style for castles. Let's just do a quick tour through some of these,
Yeah.
So none of these are taking place in the 17th or 18th centuries specifically, or even in our world. A lot of them are in fantasy worlds, but the music is, in all cases, being attached to certain structures, and it's conveying oldness, kind of ornateness, luxury. I think of the old diamond commercial with Palladio that was written specifically for that diamond company, but to be in the style almost like Bach. Which one does that sound the most like?
I think it's very
like the
Vivaldi.
Summer. Yeah, it's very Vivaldi. It's meant to sound like Vivaldi, like the seasons.
Yep.
A little bit of summer, a little bit of winter in there in Palladio, and how that was very, very specifically designed. So let me pull up my emulator here. And I shared my whole screen to you because I realized you might not be hearing my MuseScore examples, so on your end.
No, I'm doing great. They're
good. They were all popping up. Okay, video game, retro arch. Here we go. Here we get Castle Quest. And then I'll drag and drop some other things in. All right, so we'll start with Castle Quest. So thankfully, Will, all of your examples are like title screens or very early in the game.
Oh, weird. That's totally coincidental, and not because I just played the game until I found a good example and then stopped.
Ha! So here we go. We'll just sit here. I like my little adventurer. Look at his little hat.
Like a red mage.
Yeah, pink mage.
Yeah.
What is the actual jump button? I don't know. I don't actually actually know my control. There we go. Okay, let's... That doesn't that door look like a Dragon Quest door?
It does. Yeah, it looks like a similar tile set, for sure.
Yeah. Ooh, what's that do? Heals me? I don't know. What happens when I die? Look at that sad face. Adorable.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so let's look at a few others. You mentioned Castlevania, and of course this gets right back to what we were citing earlier about Gothic Bach,
Yep.
and that sort of sound.
100%.
You can go basically anywhere in this game and have a similar sort of feel.
Yeah, just somewhere a little bit. But yeah, for sure.
I love this track. Hold on. Apparently I have to be like right on it. Okay. I don't have my 8-bit dough plugged in because my daughter has taken to being really into stealing controllers and playing with them. On the plus side, it means she's going to get really good at video games really young.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She's already figured out the jump button in Mario, like Mario 1. So
oh, wow.
She sits there and makes him jump, but she hasn't figured out that she also has to move the D-pad. So, but you know, she's only a year and a half old, so
yeah,
she's got time. All right, so what's broken about this one?
This would not be. I mean,
this is not one of the tracks.
You can make a counterpoint. What's the best track? I'm gonna look up the OST for that.
Because there's Heart of Fire has the actual Bach quote in it.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
a good one. And then the what's the other kind of well-known? Oops. Anyway, I'd have to look it up.
But it's all conveying the same aesthetic. This game is very even when it's deploying those quotes, it's not using the whole song. It's kind of incorporating it into this also kind of rocky aesthetic.
Yeah, you know, and this sort of prog rocky, heavy metal-y, and occasionally, you know, this. Yeah, absolutely. And I think now, I mean, Castlevania, those soundtracks are so iconic themselves that now there's so many Metroidvania games that, yeah.
Player 3. Oh, here we go. Love this track. This game is a little annoying to get around, if I recall, because it's like a lot of backtracking in this game.
Yes, this is, I will say,
It's been a while since I played this one.
Simon's Quest and Maniac Mansion for the NES were the two video games I first beat. So
Really?
Yes.
Let's see if I can get out of here. I didn't play ahead at all in the Castlevanias. I don't know why. I should have thought to, but I did get a save state. Here we go.
Yeah,
this is Baroque.
Yep, that's the exact one I was thinking of.
We got what I call the quasi-barriolage.
Yes.
Right at that interest. Let's start.
Yeah, and I think the Castlevania aesthetic.
Shoot. There. Stop coming at me. I'm trying to listen to the music.
Yeah. So I think that's a very common thing in the Castlevania aesthetic is to have, you know, this big, I think the common, that it's that particular figure for me, or it's the whole thing where it's like a massive organ chord build-up, and then you get into this kind of prog rock thing. Yeah, here's the
Sorry,
example.
I jumped ahead. I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
I thought I would sit on the title screen a little longer, and then it just kept moving me. So here we go, for folks that were complaining about hearing it on piano.
Yeah, there it is.
Also, we can finally hear the beep speech that we weren't able to.
Yeah.
I read it as Morse code.
Mm-hmm.
Dragon Lord must be defeated. But yeah, you note here, and one of the reasons I wanted to at least open this is We don't get a lot of the richly appointed furnishings, right?
Yeah, I mean, what is
Like,
this, right?
what
You
is
know, and
this?
it sort of makes me think of
How's that a throne?
yeah, I mean, it's not even vaguely clear that that's a throne. I mean, it just looks like
There's no
brick
rugs.
floors, right? You know, there's no
And it's
whatever.
top down, so we can't see paintings or tapestries.
Right. Yeah, I don't even know what the perspective is. It's top down, but at the same time, the people are like lying sideways on the floor, not actually top down. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly.
Just like flailing on the floor. Hell.
Yeah, so there's a very confusing perspective in this game. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic example of what I mean, you could have easily had that same space on screen and told me that was the janitor's closet, and I would have been like, sure, right?
Yeah.
You know, but the music itself tells
You're
you that
filling
that's
in.
exactly right.
You're
you know,
like, oh, I'm in the castle.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Totally. And this is 3.
Yeah, this is 3. This track is so like goofy.
Oh, I know, and it like shows up in every Dragon Quest course.
Hello, begin a quest. There we go. What should we name it, Will?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Fast or slow?
Yeah, go for fast message speed, please.
For the sake of getting through the examples. Oh, you're 16. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Sweet 16, already so productive.
Yeah.
You've written a lot of scholarship for a 16-year-old. Very prescient.
Yeah, I'm in my middle to late third teenage years.
So come with your mother.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like folk tune, like Landler.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is very sort of RPG town music, even more silly perhaps than most.
Yeah, so you don't talk about this one, but it's kind of similar feel, just a little bit more folky.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the peasant
Yeah, this
dance.
is the village. This is where the plebes live, right? They get their like folk
versus.
Then we're in the castle.
Now we have flowers at least by Dragon Warrior 3. We get some landscaping. We get whatever this is.
Yeah. What are those? Barrels? Stools?
Dumpster
Mansions?
fires?
Yeah.
Weird floral arrangements that exactly match the flooring? I don't know. This is like Julianne and her. Have you heard about the pig woman thing from Final Fantasy VI?
Oh no, I don't think so.
You know the sprite of the woman that's like laying over or dead, where it's like just the random townswoman sprite? Julianne insists that that's not a woman, it's a pig wearing a fancy hat.
Oh, okay.
So anytime that comes up, we're just like, is that a pig? What is that? So yes, we get our... Now the throne room's a lot bigger. It's not quite so enclosed. We get columns. Yeah. We do get a rug now. So in 2 games, and now we get like toilets?
Yeah. On the throne.
Yeah, he's on a very literal throne. But they have like crowns behind him, so.
Yeah.
They like extend the crown effect here. And the beautiful curtains. Totally different, like they're like glowing blue.
Look at the rushing on those. I mean, that's really elaborate.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
But yeah, I think, here you wouldn't necessarily have to have the same musical thing, right? You could have done something different, but I think we've established this expectation at this point that that is there. So yeah,
and absolutely. That's something that I actually argue in my Cleopatra chapter is like just how influential these games and his scores are. On any RPGs, that there's an influence almost immediately.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the whole 7 tracks approach to RPG scoring really comes from Dragon Quest, and so I think it really is a hugely influential score. Mm-hmm. I think original Final Fantasy much less so, but yeah, except on the other Final Fantasy games maybe.
Yeah. All right, we'll come back. We'll do a few more.
Yeah.
But for now, there's all the luxury, right? So again, conveying more of the graphics than we got in the 8-bit, and part of that is the top down, that we can't get tapestries and all of that. We don't really have a lot of furniture in the tile sets because we have other things we got to do with those tile sets in terms of implying like landscape and dungeons and all those other things. So the music is sort of filling in for us. And again, diamond commercials, all these things that we're thinking of.
Yeah, all the cultural connotations of Baroque music. Yeah, absolutely. It's all there in this example. Yeah, and I think the move from Dragon Quest 1 to Dragon Quest 3 is so remarkable because it shows you quickly what they figured out how to do with this hardware and what's going on here. And yeah, no, I think it's interesting. And the music does the same thing, right? We started off with this very simple 8 measure or 16 measure, repeating binary form, pretty straightforward. And then we have this much more complicated
extended
thing. And again, if I had to guess, I think it's Sugiyama saying like, look what I can do now, right? Like, look, we took this thing and then we've like ratcheted it up to the next level. So,
yeah. And it's like, even in those first couple years of the NES, we figured out stuff like bank switching to really do like pack so much more in, and have it rendered properly for us by the game mechanics. So we were cramming more in. We were able to have more things stored and more space, and there's really clever programming workarounds too. So
yep.
People were maybe able to find a little more space for, okay, we can have a bit of a longer track here and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's much more, optimized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gauntlet is another great example of the labyrinth. So it's not just king castles. It's also like dangerous dungeon castles where we sometimes get this. And you note that there's a departure here, specifically with the NES port from the original cabinet in the arcade, that Hal Cannon's music for the NES port is particularly drawing on these Baroque features. So we'll have a description, then we will listen to the title screen. Again, this was a nice one. I really didn't have to go far in this one. After a toccata-esque opening gesture, the title music begins, a 4-measure trip around a circle of fifths sequence before beginning the sequence anew. It becomes clear that the repeating bass and its implied harmonic pattern is a unifying factor, as each new iteration contains an elaboration in the upper voices, embellished melodic lines, arpeggiating inner voices, and so on. The result is a kind of a chaconne or a passacaglia, featuring a repeating bass line and harmonic structure. And I believe this is the one that you have. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's just the bass. Yep.
Yeah, there's a bass line. We'll listen to it, but you can see it. It's a descending chaconne-like bass line. And then it repeats. So it kind of brings us back to the loop point.
Yep.
So let's see what that one sounds like. Gauntlet. And I don't have to do anything. I just sit here. So I might get a little elaboration this time. Yeah. And then it just kind of ends. And you make a comment that you're like, get on with it.
Yeah, did not stick the ending, but yeah, exactly. I think it's like, why are you still on the screen?
And then it takes you right into demo, like gameplay demo, to be like, okay, why haven't you pressed start yet? You, like getting a Mountain Dew Code Red? What are you doing?
Yeah, no, exactly. And the question in the chat about the recent Gauntlet game, the 2014 one, I was just listening earlier today to remind myself, and it doesn't do this at all. It's much more this sort of like heavy metal-y, pseudo-medieval kind of thing. It doesn't really have that same... Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have that kind of Baroque gesture, which is kind of interesting.
All the stuff I liked in high school, eh?
Yeah. And good follow-up there, Pete. And in terms of, does the musical style features get left? I mean, do these Baroque gestures move forward? And I think in some cases they do. But in some cases, I think they do get sort of left behind on the NES or on that. Yeah, it doesn't even carry very much over into the Super Nintendo, I don't think, or I shouldn't say that, into the 16-bit era. It really seems to be mostly, in my mind, with a few exceptions. Say again?
Applying orchestral textures, or it's like we either do orchestral or rock.
Yeah,
very broadly, of course.
Now, there are exceptions for sure. I would say, like the Castlevania series really leans into it a lot, like Symphony of the Night, and then all these other games that are copying Symphony of the Night have that.
Is Ryan? I don't think Ryan's with us right now. He just told me the name of a new Castlevania game the other day, and I didn't believe him. Like, Castlevania is always like a combination of some kind of gothic word with like some musical term, and it doesn't have to
like
make
Aria
any
of Sorrow, and yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. I maybe Karen remembers. Like, he said this in chat the other day, and I was like, you have to be kidding me.
Yeah. Oof. I can't even Google. Who knows? Bagatelle of ennui. Or,
right. We made a joke about that on Twitter at one point. We're like, literally you could make a generator of these.
Yeah.
And I would believe you every single time. Let's see if I can find it.
Oh man. Yeah. What is it? Rondo of Blood is the one that always gets me, where I'm like, really? How does that even make sense?
That's like so goth.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think it was a newer one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, wait, this might be it.
Harmony of Dissonance is one. Yeah.
Harmony of Dissonance. That was one where I was like,
oh, that's not a new one, right? That's
Harmony of Dissonance. That was the one.
Yeah. That's one of the DS games, maybe? Is that right? Or is that, yeah.
He didn't say, but yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I think I played that one recently. And it does have some of that Baroque stuff in there. They love leaning into that. The very much the
Baroque,
kind of gothic thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just I was reminded.
No, not at all. And so I would say, yeah, there's definitely some of that, but I think it becomes more about referring to the previous games that are having this sort of like Sonic brand versus the original sort of intent that it had. Although I guess all those would still apply in my mind.
Anyway, yeah, that was.
I love it.
No, that's for real. Apparently, that's the translation of the Japanese.
Wait, no.
That's what Ryan just he said so in chat. Apparently, Harmony of Dissonance is what they landed on for the US.
That was the revised. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, so yeah, Gauntlet. We have we've got a Chacon thing going on. So yeah, some games still do this, but yeah, it seems like we've had more of like the cinematic epic orchestra, which it maintains like a lot of medievalisms, as we've seen in Karen Cook's work and others. So there's a lot of medievalisms, and when we look at earlier music that have had a lot of influence on that type of scoring, but this is maybe seen as a more intimate texture. So I think it gets used in very specific ways now.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I think the Baroque style is either this sort of church organ connection, the sort of vampire-y church organ connection that I think Andrew was referring to earlier.
Evil medieval, as James Cleveland calls it.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
Again, as Karen has looked at, good. What was it? Good organ, bad organ.
Yeah, that's right.
Like how all these things have like you can use them for good, you can use them for evil. Bells, voices.
Yeah, and I put in the Skype chat, actually, Dana, if you're interested, a recent example of Bloodstained Ritual of the Night soundtrack, which is a great Metroidvania game that pays a lot of homage to Symphony.
Yeah. Hold on, let me pause it so I can actually throw it on stream.
Yeah.
YouTube.
So this game came out in, I don't know, a couple years ago. It's really good if you haven't played it. 2019 also.
With the tubular bells in there too. Oh, here we go. So there was our like toccata, I guess. Now we get our fugue. And the voice. Oh my goodness. Man, that's exciting. That's exciting.
It's a good soundtrack overall. But this is one, and a lot of it is that sort of rock, sort of vaguely gothic metal stuff. But then this one, I think it's in the cathedral in the game, is this very, sort of heavily Baroque thing. So it still does, I would say, persist. And I think it's really trying to connect not only to these like religious tropes, but also like really back to Symphony of the Night.
That's wild. I love it.
Yeah,
yeah, that one leans into it. So then we come to a pretty wise use of Baroque music. Ha 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 ha. Wizards and Warriors, scored by David Wise.
Yeah.
One of my favorite, like, it's not an Onion headline. I'm trying to remember which like joke site it is, but it's the one about like man tasked with scoring a track for a monkey. Writes like transcendent melody.
I don't know that one.
Oh my gosh. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, it is harddrive.net, and it is man tasked with making score for a monkey riding a swordfish underwater creates transcendent piece of music.
Nice.
One of the best headlines pretty much ever. Yeah. Absolutely true. So yeah, we stan a David Wise score around here. Wizards and Warriors is a great one. So this is 87, and this one begins with a treble voice on a compound melody that would be at home in a Bach organ work. After the initial statement, alto and bass voices enter, revealing the piece to be a series of elaborations on a repeating harmonic pattern.
Again, in the sort of Passacaglia or Chaconne pattern.
Here we go. Also title music. Thank you. Oh, hold on. I have to start over because I didn't actually switch it over for them. Let me do that. A lot of sources to juggle today.
Yeah, you really are wrangling those windows.
Start over. Okay. Ah! Come on. There we go. It just keeps going. This one is not like, get on with it. This one's like, you can sit and listen. We're here. I love that tag. Yeah. I love that like little fade out kind of
that
tag.
Would make a solid like text message sound. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's a really good example in my mind. It's very solid. And I probably should have said this earlier because I am not a scholar of Baroque music typically. But I did study harpsichord really seriously for like 6 years. And so like I hear that and I just think, this is like, oh, somebody's like, I got 2 minutes to kill in the middle of this thing. So I got to like, fiddle around and create some background music. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, same bass over and over, just do some things up
top. Yeah, we're about to do some, somebody's got some stage business to do and I got to keep going for a while or whatever the case may be. So, I think it's it works very well. But again, medieval setting, Baroque music, that makes no sense. Or pseudo medieval setting, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, the game is the devil. I really do not like. That's the worst game.
It's pretty complicated to play.
It's just, it's like Dark Souls avant la lettre, right? It's just like.
That's a clip right there.
Yeah.
I heard one.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Pete likes it.
Well, Pete's about to drop right off of this stream.
Yeah, Pete's gonna come all the way up to New York.
Yeah, Pete, I'm so sorry.
Pete's coming for you.
Oh.
And then we have another similar example in Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord from 1987, which also foreshadows the complexity of the labyrinth and of the game itself. So more of the same, but I downloaded all these ROMs.
Yeah, so we're going to play them. Yeah.
And, there's always the big thing about you have to own the thing in real life. We do. We own all of these.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like hooking up. Most of our game setup is in the basement, and the stream is on the first floor in my office. So it's partially just like, then I'd have to bring all that stuff up here, like have one of the CRTs in here, like, because of course we're gonna have it running through a CRT. Run it through the upscaler, do all the things, get the capture card. It's like, that's a lot of
course
work.
Yeah.
But yeah, we pretty much own a good amount of the NES library. So I never worry about that. But anyway. Of course, PowerPoint can't open it. This
Iron Sword is worse. Yeah.
So here's the title track here. This one goes on longer than you would think. Given the way that I feel like the graphics are kind of giving you the get on with it, the way that like the title moves.
Yeah.
Like, come on. But the music just keeps going. Perfectly happy with what it's doing. Like, could have looped. No.
Yeah.
Love that texture though. What? This is the definition of meandering right here.
Yeah.
That's the loop point.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bizarre. I think it's a really bizarre.
Goes on so much longer than you expect it to.
Yeah, and much longer than it needs to, right? This is the student that had a 3-page assignment and turned in like a 10-page research paper. Why would you do that? So it's kind of fascinating. And it, as I recall, a lot of the game is silent. So, I assume they just had a lot of memory for music. And so,
and they used a lot of it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, if a title screen is this interstitial space of like, okay, we're going to display the thing, but ultimately if there's like an opening cinematic or some kind of an intro, you might see that the first time you go to play, but most of the time you just skip right past this. So it's almost like a waste. I'm not saying it's a waste. It does important things where it sets up the game. But, if you're really going to put a lot of compositional prowess into this, and it's something people can click right out of versus having to sit through and watch.
Yeah, remind me, does it can you reboot it? Can you do that again?
Yeah.
Reboot it. Wow. Can you, turn the floppy over? If you start game, what happens?
Hold on. Make sure it's... There we go. Yeah, so if I start the game...
Oh yeah, just go right into the next.
I've actually never beaten this one.
Ooh.
Maybe since I have it, I should attempt it.
Yeah, I think my mother still has onion paper maps that she and my father made when I was a kid for the Apple II version of Wizardry, where they like mapped the whole thing out, and yeah.
That's awesome. That's like when I found my old Harvest Moon guide that I made for myself, where I drew all of like the crops and like how much they cost to get seeds, and that way I had a shorthand. And if I was going to go into town,
amazing.
Time's a wasting in Harvest Moon. You got to plan your day.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I love that. I love when we find that kind of stuff, or Julianne talked in hers about like writing little stories about like where the characters from different games would hang out with each other and stuff. Like, oh, I love it. But in the era when we used to draw our own maps all the time.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, exactly. The way that we approach these games, and to our point earlier about, the way the music fills in, I think we also narratively we're so keen to do that, right? Create stories for places where there were not stories, or to sort of fill in the narrative gaps. Um, yeah, anyway, I think we do the same thing
Yeah.
in a way that I think, nowadays, as an old person, I
Nowadays.
will say that I think there's a lot of lazy narrative writing in games, and not that laziness is like inherently bad or that whatever, but like um, I think there's a tendency in some cases to conflate obscurity of narrative with profundity. And
Are you
so,
talking about Elden Ring?
that would be a great example.
Where a
Yes.
lot of the like, if you have to look for the plot because a lot of it is like flavor text basically. Yeah, on like you pick
Right.
up an
Right.
object and you have to go into the menu and read it.
Yeah. If you're going to get
But
anything.
most of the narrative is more just like emergent gameplay in those games.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, in my mind, it's almost a sort of return to this much earlier form. But it was very often, I think, in early games, like out of necessity, and now it's just out of we haven't quite figured out how to, craft a narrative that makes sense in a ludic way. So, yeah,
And
it
yet
reminds me of Ian
we
Bogo's.
haven't we
Yeah,
haven't isolated cases, but it's almost like I think my husband would agree with me that one of the ones that really did that compellingly was Undertale, but it's almost like you can't really have that sort of like self-aware device
yeah,
twice, where you're like, oh, okay, like this is really making me think about like me as a gamer. That's it
right.
was, and it was doing that to you ludically, in sort of your gameplay options, and yet, yeah, it's like, can you just make another game like that? The point of it was that it kind of like pointed things out to you, and once those have been pointed out, you kind of can't go back to it.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things where the mechanic, yeah, exactly, right? Or like Hades, for example, where the narrative and ludic fusion allows you to, create a narrative coherence out of a genre that typically doesn't, roguelikes, right? Where you just constantly die and there's no narrative reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
But games like that do, and then I think we suddenly saw an explosion of games that were like, oh my God, you solved the problem, right?
Yeah.
You can just do that. And yeah. Anyway, I could let me loop that back to this conversation, right? Where I think part of why we saw this explosion of Baroque style at this one particular era is that it solved those problems, right? And then everyone was like, oh, Sugiyama or whoever like solved this problem. Let's all just jump on the same bandwagon, and then moved on, right? So,
Yeah.
I think Dark Souls, for example, solved the problem of really bad video game narratives by just not having a narrative, or having it be like emergent, and that
Mm-hmm.
seeming really good. But now every game does that. And so, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it's like, just because you have the tools to build an open world, we've talked about this privately, that like there's a lot of games that it's just empty. Like it's a huge world of nothing. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a space that I want to wander around and engage with, and there are specific places I'll do that, like Assassin's Creed Origins. I would go and inspect the tomb walls, and like, because I've got an Egypt thing. But there are, or I think like Breath of the Wild did a nice job of making me want to wander that world. But there are a heck of a lot of games where I have no interest in doing so. And I think you pointed out your recent experience with Cyberpunk 2077 being sort of like that, where you're just like, I don't want to do all the stuff on the map.
Yeah, right. They're just they feel like tasks, not things that are forwarding the narrative of the game. A lot of
And
times.
yet we already had a game like well before, The Witcher 3 at this point is not a new game, but like used that open world in a way that also made you want to like really uncover every single little thing.
Yeah, that's a great game. You and I have definitely agreed and talked extensively about it. But Witcher 3 is awesome. But yeah, I actually did have the experience. That I no longer know how this is connected to what we're talking about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. That I've played Breath of the Wild, I think 3 times now, and the first time I actually did not care for it very much. I was playing it I was very busy, and I just wanted to like play it and get through and beat some dungeons and like do stuff. And it was not a game that found it. I was not in the right place for enjoying that, right? Um, And so, yeah, later on, I played it again. Much better experience. Had a good time. Didn't even hate the breakable weapons that much.
That's
But
amazing. I don't know that I ever got over that frustration.
yeah, yeah. But
I
anyway,
spent I spent a couple hundred hours in that game.
yeah, yeah. No, I know. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's easy to do when you're in the right mindset to spend that much time in the game. But yeah, I don't know. We could definitely make musical connections there, but
Yeah.
we can move on.
Yeah. And just briefly, y'all know my thesis statement about Breath of the Wild, which never needs a conference paper because it's a very simple thing to say. Is just, I think the what I really appreciated about that score is that it gave you space. Like it's surprisingly sparse in areas, and it just lets you kind of take things in. And that seems like a weird thing for somebody who studies game music to talk about, but I really appreciated it because it just makes the moments where things do come forward more special. And yeah, I just felt very, very connected to that world because of the way the music was deployed.
Yeah, I think, to the sort of point that we were getting at a little bit ago, it's shocking the extent to me, it's shocking to me the extent to which these 8-bit musical traditions sort of latched on and won't let go. And so, there are lots of reasons why we loop music in this time, and I think there's lots of reasons why they wanted wall-to-wall music in a lot of Nintendo games, to mask from, the lack of visuals, or to, whatever the case may be. There's lots of reasons why I think they preferred that sort of wall-to-wall structure. But yeah, the fact that it carries on now is just like, woof, need to let that go and give people space. Games are a lot longer. They're a lot more complicated. There's a lot going on. You just can't have constant music and expect people to be able to engage, or at least give people options.
Yeah, they talk. There's a lot of different ways of negotiating that audio fatigue, right? And that's like something people learn and talk about in those spaces. Like, do you fade it out after a couple minutes and then maybe have it come back in a few minutes later? Does it have almost like a more not emergent, generative approach, okay, this space you're going to spend a lot of time in, so we're going to make this a little bit more algorithmic so you're not just hearing the same thing over and over. Is it just going to be all environmental sounds and we don't have any underscoring? Like there are a couple different approaches depending on the game. But anyway, that's modern games. We're still in the NES.
But it makes a good point to get back to this slide that you're about to put up here, we're about to talk through, right? Because Julianne and I have written about this, right, a little bit, and other people have as well, that the amount of repetition you experience on 8-bit games is just wild, the amount of musical repetition that you get. And I think we came up with the idea that you hear a normal playthrough of the original Final Fantasy. This is in the chapter Julianne and I wrote for that Psychology of Final Fantasy book.
Yeah.
And you would hear the town theme, like, I don't know, 5,000 times or something like that on a normal playthrough of the standard loop. It's this massive number of times that you would hear the same music over and over and over again. And so I have to think about that in terms of exposure to this Baroque musical style. I mean, playing an NES game, you probably would hear more Baroque. If you're playing Dragon Quest, you would hear more Baroque musical style than you might in 12 years of music education, right? Just from this one thing to sort of inculcate this musical sound. I don't know, kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And as you point out, this is not unique to video games using these signifiers. And, would it even be salient if it would? I guess we do have some game-specific sort of tropes that folks have been working on codifying. But the idea that these signifiers they become more salient or they become more powerful through that repetition and reinforcement. And so here we are connecting outside of the game to things people may have encountered in progressive rock, heavy metal, fantasy literature, sword and sorcery films, tabletop role-playing games, and this is all kind of happening in the 70s and 80s in particular. So influence
100%.
of Tolkien, of course, was earlier, but the influence of Tolkien on things.
Well, Tolkien had that big 70s renaissance.
Yeah, exactly. Sword and sorcery, fantasy films, you name a bunch, kind of the Conan the Barbarian type things. What else did Lady Hawk, was that one of yours? I read another thing recently that was basically also talking about the sword and sorcery revival, so I may be conflating, but
no, yeah. But Lady Hawk's a great example. Yeah,
Lady Hawk, Willow.
Yep.
What else we got? Yeah, those types
Excalibur.
of things. Yes, Excalibur.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Dungeons and Dragons coming out, and other tabletop RPGs, mostly D&D initially. Like that's the big one. And that these things have similar target demographics, so maybe drawing elements from each other is helpful in courting those folks. And certainly a lot of these video games, at least the RPGs, were sort of like taking the pen and paper out of. Oh yeah, here's some of your examples. Taking the pen and paper out of the system, where you're not like having to do the dice rolling yourself. Like the game will do it for you, and you could just focus on the quest or whatever. So some of the examples that you mentioned: Conan the Barbarian, the Beastmaster, Conan the Destroyer, Ladyhawke, Legend, Highlander, Willow. And then you mentioned that Golden Axe, specifically the game, was indebted to Conan the Barbarian. And that the NES box art for Gauntlet seems to be inspired.
Yeah, it's definitely like, right, you know,
this poster for Conan.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could very easily imagine either of these things repurposed as like a heavy metal cover from the same time period, right? You know, that there's this connection very much there as well.
Yeah, and you get to that too. You say you say like it isn't just that it's all iconography either. Music is all about this, and it's threading through all of these things that a lot of prog rock and heavy metal bands in the 60s through the 80s were really profoundly influenced by Tolkien and fantasy in general. You list examples. We won't play them on this channel because I like not having videos taken down. And gameplay is one thing and generally fine, but yeah, some of this stuff you can go look it up on your own time, everyone. This is your homework. Go listen to Ramble On by Led Zeppelin, Battle of Evermore, Black Sabbath's The Wizard, and the whole genre of heavy mithril. I love that. Based love that specifically so on Tolkien.
Yeah.
And metal and prog, even when they're not drawing on fantasy necessarily, as Robert Walser's work gets into, a lot of them are engaging with classical styles, kind of more generally. So even outside of that sort of like epic fantasy metal space, you see Moody Blues, Deep Purple, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who are particularly influenced by Bach and Vivaldi. Not to mention, you know, to go back, you mentioned Wendy Carlos earlier. So, like, there's also, like, in the popular music sphere, that sort of experiment happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would 100% say yes, right? You know, and I've made this case in other spaces, right, where I think there's something to what we project onto 8-bit music, right, where we tend to... we musicologists tend to assume that it would have been orchestrated or it would have been a certain instrument, but you couldn't do that. You didn't have that timbral option, right? And so I think about some of the examples we've listened to, right? Castlevania or that whole thing, right? And we just say, oh, yeah, this probably was an orchestra in that person's mind. But no, maybe it was a prog rock band, you know?
Yeah, maybe it was a 3 or 4 piece band. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is my whole argument about Final Fantasy, that I think a lot of the like symphonic things we project onto Final Fantasy are actually coming straight from prog rock instead, and we're just sort of imposing this cinematic musical language onto it when it's not really the most applicable musical style, or, you know, whatever. You can do whatever.
Yeah. We talked about that with the Final Fantasy VI Pixel remaster that we just did last month.
Yeah.
Or so. We spent a while on it, but because we were interested in how every track, you know, that's like Final Fantasy VI. Like, we looked at some of the other remasters. That one we played all of, though, because we were really curious. Like, that game has such a reputation and special place in a lot of people's hearts and in ours. It was the first game that we ever did on Ryan's channel, so it was all, and it also came out right around our 5th year anniversary of streaming, so it was kind of perfect as like a gala event. So we had special guests on every week, and we did a lot of talk about, okay, they're making some interesting choices here, and we said in certain places, this reads more like the concert version, like, and I wish that they had leaned more into like the prog elements, or like there were definitely times where it was like, okay, you could have let out let it out a little more than you did, you know, taking a little bit more risk, but they were, I think, more careful with that one than they were with some of the other remasters in terms of, and you know, all the ability to record everything. Ryan demoed a little bit of 5. They seemed like they took more risks with 5 because that one wasn't as, you know, vaunted.
Yeah, you can say that.
Over here, not being accessible to people.
I think there's a lot of like musical like retconning, if you will, of what was intended. or what's going on in the score. And so,
and you know me, I hate the notion of claiming that there was that intention to begin with. Like, are these people not writing for what's in front of them? Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know,
NES is not a substitute for something else. It's its own instrument, right? And I feel that you could make the same argument about harpsichord, right? It's like, oh, well, they only wrote for harpsichord because piano hadn't been invented yet.
Right.
No, it's its own instrument with its own timbre.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I get annoyed. Even like, I love the projects like where we uncover samples of original synths used in these games. Matthew Valente does this really well. But sometimes then you see people posting it as if like, this is how it was meant to sound. No, it was meant to sound how it sounded. Like,
yeah, correct.
Anyway, that's my soapbox. Y'all, if you follow me at all, you've heard me say this on Thursday night streams for years. Like, and that's not to say I love hearing those sources. I love that like Donkey Kong one that folks were passing around a while back, Donkey Kong Country, where they're like, here's all the original samples when they're uncompressed. Like, that is cool to hear, but it doesn't mean that it's like better in any way, because there's timbral changes that I think sometimes are less desirable than working within what you had in front of you. So anyway.
Yep. And Dana, as you know, this is why I resist transcription so often, because I think the majority of the time, or a significant portion of the time, transcription is like shoving music into this box that it doesn't fit into neatly to prove a point that we want to make, instead of just taking the object as it is.
I talked about that in my dissertation a little bit too, because there are things that are weird to transcribe, like bleepy bits in Dr. Mario. I actually talk about sort of the limits of transcription, and I talk about the idea that like the transcription's form is very much going to be shaped by how you plan to use it, and that's why I don't grab just like fan ones that are there's a lot of really good fan transcriptions out there, but a lot of them are so I can learn to play it on piano, so like stuff is missing, or and so I often kind of want or need to know what was in the original channels. Like, I'm interested in that allocation and the switching between the different timbres, and so I like to have it channel by channel, but that doesn't read musically well. So there are other people that are like, well, I'm going to do it in like orchestral score order or whatever. So it depends what you need it for. And I do different things if I'm transcribing it to perform versus putting it, where I'm talking about something about the chip, where I want to look at how it was laid out on the chip. So it really depends. Yeah. It depends.
Yeah. And I would say, it gets into is it a transcription or is it an adaptation?
Mm-hmm. Translation.
Yeah.
Transbiteration, as I credited Julian with.
Nice.
So yeah. Full circle here is that these game composers, like Uematsu, who we've been mentioning, and Sakuraba, were influenced by prog rock, and the work of Norris S. Josephson has pointed out the widespread use of Baroque recurring bass lines in prog more generally. So we have folks that have not been working on game music, but have been working on prog rock and other areas showing this Baroque influence. And then we also know that a lot of these game composers liked prog, so it's like a big circle. Not to mention folks like Sugiyama that were actually trained classically, and so like they're also bringing in that influence, and then the game composers are probably listening to each other. The point is, all of the sections of the labyrinth connect to each other here.
They do.
So Gauntlet is your smoking gun. You come back to this. You mentioned the title screen. Whereas, the Chaconne simply reaches a, as you say, fairly unsatisfactory conclusion, where it's kind of like the get on with it, okay. Where it reappears during the game, the music goes in a very different direction. So in this setting, rather than abruptly ending at the 30-second mark, the tone of the piece suddenly shifts in a series of rapid arpeggios that suggest a guitar cadenza in a heavy metal or prog rock track. The music then picks up the original harmonic progression, but with a much elaborated bass line and frequent virtuosic eruptions in the upper voices. So I actually prepped for this, y'all.
Nice.
I have a save state. Save state options load. So hopefully I won't die before I can.
Oof.
I gotta press the right button. So I'm just gonna do my best. I know you have to kind of keep moving in this game.
You can just sit in one space, I think.
Oh yeah, it's just the health counts down. I think we'll hear all of it. So this is all pretty much the title track. You're like, okay, cool.
Here we go.
You're like, wait, what? Needs more like percussion.
Yeah.
But the rest of it's there.
I guess they need percussion for the sound effects.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be disrupting anybody.
Yeah, I like this part.
That's the same ending from the title screen.
Yep.
But yeah, we have this whole like inserted new section when it's the
Yeah.
level track. It's not just a straight reuse.
And I feel like, is it a strong bad quote that it's like you can just picture it like way up on the little twiddly bits on the guitar,
The
and
little
like
twiddly
yeah,
bits.
yeah,
Trogdor!
yeah.
There is a board game of Trogdor that I really want to play. I don't have
Oh,
it.
nice.
We, Joe and I, we had our own apartments. We were obviously well out of like living under our parents' house. The idea of having like a wedding shower, it was like, well, that's for like young couples that don't have like pots and pans to cook with, right? And our friends were like, what if you did a board game shower? So we did a board game themed wedding shower, and we got some pretty
Wow.
complex games because Joe was like, we don't need Catan. Everybody has Catan. We don't need Monopoly, so we have like pretty complicated like Euro games and
Wow.
no one to play them with because the pandemic was right after our wedding. So there's a couple that we've done 2-player. Actually, right before I went into labor, we were playing Mage Knight,
Sure.
which is pretty complex, but yeah.
Yeah.
We
Well,
like some
fortunately, you've
tabletop.
now had 2 years to learn the rules for one of them.
I
That should
know.
that should be good enough. Maybe 2.
Well, and Julianne actually plays, what was the one that I was really excited about? It's super complicated. I can't think of the name of it. I feel like Karen's done it as well. It's the one that takes like 16 hours to play.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
You
really
have to do it
selling-
over multiple sessions.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, similar to D&D, it's not that much different.
It's true.
But yeah, a lot of the ones I like are not quite that long. One of my favorites is actually, I think you would enjoy. It's called Viticulture, and you run competing vineyards and you're trying to like produce different wines.
I like it.
And you have your little characters, and you like move them to like do different things in the vineyard, and
Combines multiple interests. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
like that's the game. Like you sit there and like you do a wine tasting with the game. I think that's how I play. So anyway, Gauntlet kind of tied us all together here, and our conclusions. And you sort of basically say you come back to the labyrinth as a structuring tool here. That the music forms part of this complex intermedial labyrinth. Baroque style connects to similar appropriations in heavy metal in Prague, which connects to Dungeons and Dragons in 1980s fantasy cinema, all of which connect to Lord of the Rings. Each path in this maze of signifiers simultaneously connects with each other path, ex post facto in Tolkien's case, constantly strengthening the connection between these varied media forms and forming a central nexus of 1980s geek culture in heavy scare quotes, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I still agree with that. I think it does. And I think something that we've talked about a lot is the frustration that many of us feel that games and game music especially get kind of left out of these conversations about geek culture at this time. Or, we're exploring one part of this, but we're not looking at the whole picture. So I'm really hopeful that, we can get to a point. Part of why I think I wanted to write this is to get the games more into dialogue with the rest of what's going on in media and to bring that in. And a lot of people are doing that now, which is fantastic. But
because there's so many people that will talk about all these things and you're like, music would support your argument, and then they don't touch on it at all because it's really perceived to be this very separate specialty. But at the same time, they're also not seeking out to see who's worked on it. Like there is a bit of like siloing happening in other areas of media studies where it's like, oh, I'm going to take like maybe a narratological approach to this film or whatever, and not realize that there's already a musicologist that like wrote about the music of that same film, and like that would be useful. So I try really hard. I know if I'm going to work on, especially like maybe a game adaptation of a movie, I'm going to look at all the stuff published on that movie academically that I can. So I don't know what it is about our field, and this is part of doing things like this. Like maybe people will see things, maybe people will connect a little bit, and
Yeah, no, this is great for that exact purpose.
Always good to be as versatile as possible. Cultivate versatility, everyone.
Yeah.
It's like my grad student advice. Cultivate
Yeah.
versatility, cultivate relationships. Those are the two things I say.
I can't think of better advice.
Both of them make you a better scholar, but the second one also just like enriches your life as a human. Because man, I love the friendships I've been able to develop out of this field. So I also like hear that you're sort of you're not trying to claim there's like a conspiracy either. This is not some like big grand plan where they're like, let's use Baroque music, right? It's just that these associations are out there and they're carrying over and they're exerting influence in ways that might not be possible to even disentangle. But you do just say, hey, this is what happens at this moment in time. We're developing a musical language for a new medium, and these folks are turning into things that they know that their players are going to have exposure to, and sort of they're going to draw on those connections, and then they're going to use them when they're doing their own fantasies.
Yeah.
Final or otherwise.
And I love that about the 80s, especially in games, right? That it's just such an experimental era, and we haven't quite settled into what's going on, and everybody's just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it makes it very exciting, I think, that we have just such radically different styles happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm guessing that we can hear but not see. Did I not change it over when I played Gauntlet? You weren't missing much. I was literally just sitting there. Sorry. Again, juggling a lot of sources today. But here's the slide as it originally looked before I replaced it with standing in the field. This is
nice. Thanks.
The classic where I have the front page of the original, and it looks all pretty, and there's a Chicago style citation formatted properly, and
yeah, thanks. That was beautiful citation.
All that good stuff. Good stuff.
And this is a really good one too, because the title's kind of long and the title of the book's long, so it really adds to that word count in a very pleasant way when you put that in the bibliography.
I will note that when I tweeted this citation didn't fit on the initial tweet with the slide, so then I did a second tweet where I said full citation to follow or whatever.
Yep.
So the second tweet has this, but even that didn't fit. I had to change the and for and Adam Whittaker to an ampersand.
Oh, wow.
Then it fit. So it was just
close.
Slightly too long. So some of y'all are gonna test where I'll have to have multiple tweets. I'll have to have a whole thread just to say the name of the article.
The title. Nice.
Well,
thanks. It means a lot that you would do that. Go to all that extra work just for us.
Yeah, I like, and of course for the eagle-eyed, this is the Dragon Warrior 3 title screen before the actual title fades in. I caught it right before then and screenshotted.
Sneaky. It's a really good background.
It is a good background. I thought it looked, because it's got the castle element and the torch, and yet it's allows for good contrast. So I like making them pretty.
Artful as always.
I do my best.
Yeah.
So the last thing I didn't really ask you is sort of like where this came from. It's a little late to do it, but very quickly before we let everyone go here, I'd love to hear where did this one come out of? Because I don't remember seeing you present this, at least not in this form.
I think the editors, reached out to me and said, "Do you have anything that could work on this?" And I said, "No, but but I can come up with something." And it was a project that I was working on in tandem with. My book Unlimited Replays came out in 2018. Mm-hmm. And so this was very sort of in tandem work when I was looking at actual Baroque music in games. And there were a few times where I, would encounter a game and I would think, is this pre-existing music or is this, because a couple of the examples really could have been some sort of pre-existing thing. And then I got kind of interested in the whys and the wheres as I do. And so came into it. But I think it's one of the very few papers that I've never given at a conference. I didn't do it anything. It was just purely for this. And then then went into the volume. And I think that's why it was sort of something that I wanted to call attention to, because I think it's a really good book, and I think
particularly for people working in like other media, film, there's a lot of really good film. I taught it this semester. That's actually why I have my own hard copy. I had a Kindle version before this, which I then realized after I bought the book. But I needed it anyway because I was teaching from it, so it was better to just have it in front of me on the Zoom calls.
Yep.
So
no, it's definitely good.
Pete thought you were reaching down to retrieve a cat. He's
no,
like,
I'm so sorry. Oh no,
they're not in here right now.
No, they're like closed up in the other and in one of the guest rooms.
Probably mewing for you.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think this is the only game chapter in the book?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like to me, it was really important to have that representation in the volume. So yeah.
There's one on Werner Herzog's Carlo Gesualdo. I don't know what to call it. Documentary. Have you seen that? Death in Five Voices.
I mean, I know that it exists.
Joe found a Blu-ray of it that we watched it on in the home theater, and it's an interest. I mean, it's very Werner Herzog. It kind of reads like a documentary, but then you're like, there's things here that it's like not very documentary. And the music throughout is really good, of course, because it's all Gesualdo, and he has an actual ensemble performing it live. So there's shots of them kind of like in rehearsal and performing it, kind of chamber style in a fancy little like living room area.
Nice.
It's a cool piece. Anyway,
cool.
I should read that now that I've seen that and see that that's in here, because what did I teach out of this? Why did I even buy this?
Why did
I bought the, well, I mean, I already had a Kindle version, so I had that because of your chapter. But the things that I taught, I looked at Music and Fantasy Past, Neo-Medievalism, and Game of Thrones, which is the final chapter here. We talked about that. We looked at Celtic music and Hollywood cinema, representation, stereotype, and affect by Simon Nugent. I think those were the two main ones that we pulled out of here. And sometimes I just don't want the poor librarians at Hartford to have to scan everything to me. So, if it's more than like a chapter, and since I do request like multiple chapters, and sometimes I'd be able to find things other ways, but I like to have my own copies if it's a book that is useful. So this was a fun one though. And similarly, I had the same issue with Tim Summers, asking him to be on. I was like, you have a lot of publications. What do you want to do? So
well, I'm happy to come back anytime.
I would love to have you back.
Just the bottom of the barrel for a while. But yeah, absolutely. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is good stuff. So we'll have you back. And my joke had been like, we don't have to do Blip Bloop Bach because everyone's read that one already. I think that's like the first thing they hand you when you say you want to be a Ludomusicologist. It's like that.
Wow,
Karen.
Yeah, that is
Karen
a little
Cullen's
embarrassing.
Game Sound, Casey Cook's Game Sound.
I definitely have better things than that. Yeah.
Maybe Tim Summers' book. The first one. What is it? I'm a fan of video games. I was like, not the Zelda one. I mean, that's good. That's good too. But I'm like, in terms of like the starter kit, right?
Yeah.
It's like Blip Bloop Bach, Game Sound, and understanding video game music, probably.
I'm so happy to be the like gateway drug into apparently.
Yeah, because it's like short and accessible, and folks like it. But yeah, I like that this one it touches on some of the same things you mentioned. Captain Comic and some of those examples that you touch on in other places, but yeah, this one's more extensive, and again, it's maybe one that folks wouldn't have had access to, which is really a nice thing to be able to highlight. And if anybody needs copies of it, maybe ask your institutions to buy that's the way, y'all. Don't buy it's one thing to be me and try to buy all these books for yourself, but it's way better to have the libraries buy them.
Yes, agreed. Or,
and then it's accessible to you. But yes, there's also the, reach out to the authors, and folks are generally quite happy to share things with you as well. Will is the Beethoven of gateway drugs to Ludomusicology, says Pete.
Wow, Pete.
I feel like he's trying to trigger you a little bit here.
I'm going to send a truck full of cartridges of like Wizards and Warriors 2. Just dump it on your front lawn.
Just like Atari ET style, like
exactly.
It.
Yeah.
You're gonna buy up every single copy just for pettiness.
Yeah.
And all the collectors are gonna be so mad at you.
Yeah. It's gonna be that, and then Sneak King or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, that's what you send to me.
I know. It's exactly right.
Sneak King to me.
Amazing.
Anyway, join us next week where we are going to have on Kevin Burke
Yeah.
for Lagrange Point, the chapter in the Green Book, which you edited. So thank you for providing a venue for so many of us to publish some really that whole book is some of my favorite. In terms of the edited collections, you know, they can be very hit or miss, and you're like, I'm not going to read every single thing. That is an exception to the rule. That book, you and Steve, I think, just worked really well together as editors. You picked a good group of people writing on a really nice array of topics. So
it's a great book. I feel really good about that, and that's my literal favorite part of being in the field is like finding these ways to help people get their great scholarship out there. So
yeah, and we have some new ones coming out. So you know, this is just thus far. I'm just sort of like playing favorites within the the Ludo volume and the studying play. What's that one called? Music and video game studying play. The Pink Book.
The Pink Book. Yeah.
And the Green Book. Like between those three, the Green Book's my favorite. But that's not to say I hate the other one. Like there's great stuff in all of them. Great stuff in all of them. Handbook. And it could just be that I've played a lot of the RPGs, but even the ones I hadn't, I was really interested. Like Lagrange Point's a good one because it focuses on Sega Genesis sound, and it's a game that I think a lot of people haven't played. Kevin was talking about we might try to hook up and do a little bit of gameplay. We'll try to figure out how we do that because I haven't. I'll have to do a little bit before next time, but. Anyway, that's next week. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we will see you next time.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.